The fluorescent lights above the House Oversight Committee chamber buzzed with an almost surgical hum, their brilliance stripping the room of comfort, leaving only exposure. The mahogany desks curved in a horseshoe, polished to a mirror sheen, that reflected nervous glances and trembling hands. The brass plate in front of Jasmine Crockett's seat gleamed with ruthless precision. Representative Jasmine Crockett, Texas 30th District. In front of her rested a red folder, sealed, heavy. Its edges caught the light like a weapon disguised as paperwork. Inside, pages carried numbers and signatures that were more lethal than any blade. For Donald Trump, those papers represented the unraveling of a fortune, a myth, and an identity built on the illusion of invincibility. The air conditioner roared above, but the room itself seemed to hold its breath. C-SPAN's cameras perched around the perimeter, their lenses glinting like predators circling prey. Every click of a pen, every shift of a chair became amplified, echoing in a chamber primed for an execution, not of a man but of an empire. Trump leaned back, his familiar smirk plastered on his face, but even that expression looked thinner under the LED glare. His lawyers whispered frantically, stacking papers that no longer carried weight. The seal on Crockett's folder remained unbroken, but its presence alone dominated the room. The moment stretched. One woman against a billionaire whose name had been stamped on towers, casinos, and a presidency. One truth against decades of spectacle. The countdown was silent but unmistakable. 47 seconds until the folder opened. 47 seconds. Until numbers stripped bare the myth of touchable wealth. Reporters in the gallery scribbled notes with the fever of battlefield correspondence. Phones buzzed with push alerts already primed. Crockett confronts Trump. Billions on the line. And in that silence, the chamber became more than a hearing room. It became an operating theater. The fluorescent lights cut deep, polished mahogany, reflected a nation's divisions. And in the center sat Jasmine Crockett, steady hands poised above the microphone. Holding the scalpel that could sever Donald Trump's last claim to power, the room wasn't waiting for a question. It was waiting for an incision. The courtroom. Doors creaked as aides and reporters shuffled into the chamber. The polished floors amplifying every footstep into a drumbeat of impending reckoning. Outside, sunlight struck the windows at an angle that turned the blinds into sharp parallel bars, as if the room itself were a cage. Holding power and consequence in fragile suspension, Trump sat in his usual corner. Suit crisp tie to red, posture brimming with rehearsed dominance. Yet under the surface, tension threaded through his posture. Invisible to the untrained eye but glaring under the scrutiny of seasoned watchers. Each flicker of his eyes betrayed a calculation. How to spin, deflect, survive. But the red folder, in front of Crockett, rendered strategy irrelevant. Numbers didn't lie, and the arithmetic within those pages was merciless. Jasmine Crockett adjusted her notes, her fingertips brushing the edges of the folder as if weighing the gravity of a scalpel against the pulse of the empire she was about to dissect. Her eyes scanned the room, not the crowd, not the press, the room itself. Every polished brass doorknob, every reflective tabletop seemed to hum with expectation. She was aware that in these very moments the narrative of power could be rewritten. A subtle murmur ran through the gallery. Porters leaned forward, lenses trained, fingers poised above record buttons. Social media alerts buzzed in muted pockets, headlines already forming in anticipation of the upheaval to come. Ow. One tweet would send shockwaves. One pause from Crockett could destabilize decades of carefully curated myth. Trump's lawyers whispered, among themselves, a nervous symphony of strategizing that felt hollow under the weight of reality. The empire they'd built on contracts, deals, and political theater was not a fortress, but a fragile glass sculpture, vulnerable to a single precise strike. And Crockett, steady and deliberate, held the instrument of that strike. Every tick of the wall clock seemed amplified, each second measured in potential loss. For the audience inside and the millions watching from screens across America, it wasn't just a legal proceeding. It was a showdown of narrative and identity, the illusion of invincibility. versus the unwavering assertion of accountability. Crockett's gaze didn't waver. Her voice, when it finally broke the silence, would carry not just words but the weight of consequence. Now, she was aware, as was everyone else, that the stakes were unprecedented. A billionaire's fall wasn't just financial, it was cultural, symbolic, a tectonic shift of perception, and as she inhaled, readying herself to speak, the room seemed to tilt, the air heavy with expectation. The fluorescent lights above didn't just illuminate faces, they revealed truths long hidden beneath layers of gold and pretense. For Donald Trump, the stakes could not have been higher. For Crockett, they had always been this high. The difference was, she now had the leverage to turn history in a single, unflinching moment. The sun hadn't yet broken fully over Manhattan when the first hints of chaos stirred in Trump Tower. Gold-plated handles glinted in the morning light, marble floors reflecting the heavy footsteps of men and women whose loyalty had long been bought in dollars and deals. Behind the glossy facade of luxury, whispers of uncertainty wove through the corridors like smoke, invisible, but impossible to ignore. Donald J. Trump had built his empire on spectacle. The towers, the billboards, the constant parade of media. Appearances all carefully choreographed, each image calculated to impress, to intimidate, to dominate. To outsiders, it seemed eternal, unassailable, a modern colossus of wealth and influence. But within the gilded walls, cracks had always existed. Contract disputes, regulatory challenges, lawsuits piling up like forgotten bricks in a crumbling wall. The public saw the shine. The insiders felt the tremors, in courtrooms and boardrooms alike. Trump's demeanor was the same. Smirk first, calculation second, attack last. The world had been conditioned to accept that this performance, this aura of invincibility, equaled truth. But Crockett's impending confrontation threatened to shatter that carefully constructed illusion, from Queens to Wall Street. The narrative of Trump had always been one of defiance. Bankruptcy filings were not failures, but badges of cunning. Lawsuits were theater, debt a temporary inconvenience. He had turned adversity into propaganda, convincing millions that resilience meant invulnerability. And yet, each success relied not just on strategy, but on a fragile suspension of disbelief, a belief that wealth could mask flaws. The contrast was stark. Where Trump saw power as accumulation towers, numbers, influence, and media attention, Crockett saw accountability as a force of law and consequence. His arrogance was a double-edged sword. It had elevated him to fame. Yes, but it had also blinded him to the possibility that someone, somewhere, could see through the mirage. In the quiet of the Oval Office-inspired chambers, surrounded by portraits of victories passed and contracts signed, Trump prepared for hearings that had always been procedural formalities. He reviewed documents, nodded to advisors, all while the red folder loomed, unassuming, yet potent, in Crockett's hands. Believed his fame could protect him, his fortune could shield him, his theatrics could distract. But the true threat had never been a single adversary. It had been the embodiment of persistence and principle. And now it sat directly across from him. The arrogance, the contradictions, the bravado that had carried him through decades of media. Scrutiny were all tools that could be dismantled with precision. Each misstep, each overconfidence-laden gesture would now become evidence of fragility. Every whisper of dissent within his own team, every subtle glance exchanged, fed the narrative of an empire teetering on the edge. And yet, for all the grandeur, for all the bluster, there remained a human element, a vulnerability masked beneath the public persona. Trump's gaze shifted constantly, calculating risks, anticipating attacks, weighing perception. What few understood was that in this arena, those calculations mattered less than integrity, composure, and the ability to wield truth as a weapon. Qualities Crockett had mastered by the time the cameras rolled. Trump had become a figure suspended between legend and liability, the weight of decades of arrogance pressing down like a tower about to collapse. Every pause, every gesture, every flash of the eye was magnified by history and by the nation watching. The empire wasn't just his to lose. It had always been an illusion, waiting for someone courageous enough to expose it. And in that chamber, with Crockett's unblinking focus fixed upon him, that exposure was imminent. The empire built on audacity and spectacle would soon meet a force it could not charm, cannot buy, and certainly cannot intimidate. The morning sun spilled over the skyline of Dallas, slicing through the glass and steel like a promise of clarity. In a modest apartment in the city's eastern edge, Jasmine Crockett had once woken to the hum of a refrigerator and the distant roar of traffic, not the applause of audiences, not the flashing cameras of national media. This was the environment where discipline had been forged, where grit had been tested daily, where a sense of justice had been planted like a seed in hard soil. From her earliest days, Crockett understood the subtle lessons of observation. She watched neighbors struggle against bureaucratic indifference, witnessed the quiet despair of families trapped by systemic obstacles, and felt the sting of inequality firsthand. Her parents, neither wealthy nor politically connected, instilled in her the unwavering belief that intellect, persistence, integrity could bridge the gap between circumstance and opportunity. College classrooms became her battlegrounds of ideas. She devoured legal texts with the intensity of someone preparing not for grades, but for purpose. Every case study, every moot court argument, every late-night session in the library sharpened her understanding. The law was not an abstract concept. It was a living instrument capable of reshaping lives, exposing lies, and correcting injustices. By the time she entered law school, Crockett had already cultivated a reputation for precision, analytical rigor, and unflinching commitment. Professors noted the quiet fire in her eyes, a determination that spoke louder than any argument. She volunteered in community legal clinics, assisted families navigating eviction proceedings, and defended the disenfranchised when most lawyers chose safer, higher-paying paths. Each small victory, each act of service, reinforced her sense of responsibility. Power was meaningful only when it served the people. When Crockett first announced her congressional campaign, critics dismissed her as inexperienced, a fresh face with lofty ideals and little leverage. But what they underestimated was her strategic mind, her ability to build coalitions, and her unwavering moral compass. Supporters flocked not because of celebrity or spectacle, but because she represented the rare fusion of courage and competence. Her trajectory wasn't meteoric by accident. Every committee meeting she attended, every speech she delivered, was calculated to illuminate truth without resorting to theatrics. She understood the theater of politics, but refused to be consumed by it. Where others shouted, she reasoned. Where others flaunted power, she earned it. And now facing Donald Trump, she carried not just her legal acumen, but a lifetime of preparation. The red folder resting before her was heavy with consequence, yet she handled it with the calm confidence of someone who had faced adversity in countless forms and emerged not just unbroken, but sharpened. Her campaign trail had taught her patience. In strategy, the courtroom had honed her timing and composure. The community she served had given her the moral clarity to see what needed to be done, even when it was dangerous or unpopular. Every setback had been a lesson, every victory a reminder that responsibility came with accountability. The gallery could see her poised demeanor, but what they didn't immediately perceive were the countless nights spent preparing for moments exactly like this. The hours reading financial statements, parsing legal jargon, rehearsing responses, anticipating counterattacks. She had mapped the terrain of power and identified its weak points, understanding that justice was a precision instrument, not a blunt weapon. As she adjusted the microphone in front of her, the room seemed to acknowledge her presence, a subtle shift in tension, as though the air itself recognized that someone of consequence had arrived. Crockett wasn't just another politician. She was a force shaped by life, intellect, and principle, ready to confront the facade of untouchable authority with the exacting force of truth. And in that moment, the case as Trump's empire loomed like a monolith of ambition and excess, Crockett's own story built on struggle. Diligence and unwavering resolve made it clear. She wasn't here to negotiate or perform. She was here to execute accountability with surgical precision, exposing vulnerabilities that the world had long been told were impervious. The chamber, the cameras, the murmurs of the press, none of it mattered. What mattered was preparation. Meeting opportunity, integrity, meeting spectacle, and history waiting to be written in real time. The room vibrated with anticipation as the hearing commenced. A silence so complete it felt like static before a storm. Fuck! The polished mahogany tables reflected the bright glare of overhead lights, mirroring the sharp glances exchanged between legal teams. Every microphone crackle, every shuffling of papers became amplified, punctuating the tension that had been building for months, years. Even in the quiet corridors of power, Trump leaned back, his signature smirk in place, but there was a twitch in his jaw, a flicker in his eyes that betrayed unease. The spectacle of invincibility he had cultivated for decades now teetered on a knife's edge. Crockett, seated across the horseshoe chamber, didn't flinch. Her hands hovered above the red folder, fingers lightly brushing its edges. It's a subtle reminder of the weapon it contained. The first volley was procedural. Questions about financial statements, complex corporate entities, layered trusts. Trump's attorneys tried to shield him, redirect, obfuscate, but Crockett had anticipated every maneuver. She presented her points with measured clarity, each sentence a scalpel cutting through decades of carefully constructed narrative. A murmur ran through the gallery. Reporters instinctively leaned forward, cameras zoomed. Every pause from Trump, every attempt at interruption, only heightened the drama. The contrast was stark. One man, accustomed to controlling every room he entered, now visibly rattled. One woman, unwavering, commanding not with volume, but precision. Trump attempted his usual tactic, bluster and diversion. He raised his voice, pointing fingers, invoking past successes and threats of counter-litigation. But Crockett met each escalation with calm, deliberate responses. Her voice never cracked, her rhythm never faltered. The red folder seemed to pulse between them. It's a silent arbiter of truth and consequence. The tension spiked as she presented a critical page. Numbers and dates aligned to expose contradictions in Trump's claims. His smirk faltered. Sweat traced down his temple under the harsh LED lights. Advisors leaned closer, whispering frantic reminders. But the room had shifted. The air was no longer just tense. It was electric. Crockett's words didn't just challenge Trump, they reframed the narrative. What had once been a procedural hearing became a battle over credibility, morality, and the vulnerability of concentrated wealth. The audience, both live and digital, sensed the seismic shift. Hashtags began trending even before her sentences landed. Hashtag Crockett exposes. Hashtag Empire crumbles. Hashtag Truth vs. Power. Trump's attempts at counterattack became increasingly erratic, each statement undercut by evidence meticulously organized and delivered. The gallery's whispers turned into audible gasps. Cameras caught fleeting expressions of disbelief among his allies. Every gesture Crockett made a slight raise of her eyebrow. A deliberate pause amplified the sense that control had slipped from his grasp. By the midpoint of the hearing, the debate was no longer about law alone. It was theater, spectacle, and moral reckoning interwoven. The room seemed to hold its breath as the billionaire confronted a reality he had long avoided, that preparation. Intellect and unyielding integrity could topple even the most imposing of empires, and as the session drew toward its first climax, Crockett's calm composure contrasted starkly with Trump's mounting agitation. It was no longer a contest of wealth and fame. It was a duel of principle versus arrogance, poise versus bluster. The gallery leaned in collectively, sensing that the tipping point had arrived. The next move, a word, a gesture, a reveal could redefine the balance of power in real time, fade to black for suspenseful pause, and then, in a single, deliberate motion, Crockett unveiled the moment that would shatter the illusion entirely. The chamber's atmosphere thickened as Jasmine Crockett leaned forward, fingertips brushing the edges of the red folder. Every eye in the room followed her, but she wasn't performing, she was executing. The fluorescent lights above seemed sharper now, slicing the air, illuminating the tension that hung like a living thing. Trump tried to interrupt, his voice booming with rehearsed authority. But Crockett's gaze didn't waver. She raised a single hand, a subtle signal that silenced the room. Even the advisors who had believed in his invincibility felt the weight of inevitability pressing down. Then she spoke. Slowly at first, precise. Each word measured, numbers, dates, transactions, meticulous evidence that left no room for misinterpretation. The folder wasn't just paper, it was the embodiment of accountability. Every point she delivered punctured decades of bravado, exposing cracks in an empire built on audacity and illusion. The first reaction came from the gallery, collective intake of breath. Reporters' fingers hovered over record buttons, cameras pivoted, phones vibrated with alerts even before the words fully landed. Trump's smirk faltered. His eyes darted to advisors, to lawyers searching for some escape, some shield, but there was none. The facts were immovable, undeniable. Crockett paused. The silence stretched, electric, the kind that carries the weight of history in a single heartbeat. And then she delivered the blow, a page revealing a sequence of financial maneuvers that exposed not just negligence but deliberate obfuscation. The room shifted. The polished mahogany reflected the tension. Each reflection a mirror of disbelief. Trump's voice cracked now, a rare fracture in the armor of arrogance. He gestured wildly, attempted deflection, but it was futile. Crockett's calm, unwavering tone made every interruption meaningless. She didn't need volume. Her clarity carried more force than any shout. Every word, every pause, every pointed gesture made it abundantly clear. The empire's foundation was not just challenged, it was collapsing. The cameras captured the moment perfectly. Close-ups of advisors frozen mid-whisper, reporters scribbling, frantic notes, social media notifications spiking in real time, hashtag Crockett strikes, hashtag Trump exposed, hashtag red folder reveals. The world was watching, but more importantly, the world was witnessing. Authority could be held accountable, spectacle could be dissected, and truth could triumph over illusion. Crockett's final statement landed like a gavel, not loud, not performative, but precise and irrevocable. The red folder slid slightly forward, as if symbolically delivering its verdict. Trump sank slightly in his chair, the bravado drained, placed with the stark reality that the empire he had built on perception and audacity was vulnerable. And then, for just a heartbeat, the room held still. Every eye, every lens, every mind understood. The narrative had shifted. Power had been tested, and the calculation was clear. Integrity, preparation, and fearless precision had delivered a blow that could not be ignored. As the chamber exhaled, collectively, Crockett remained poised, a beacon of composure and moral clarity. The empire trembled, the spectacle faltered, and the first echoes of history began to ripple outward, stoppable. The moment Crockett's words landed, the chamber seemed to vibrate, as if the air itself had registered the seismic shift. Reporters scrambled, cameras pivoted, and the click of record buttons became a staccato drumbeat, echoing the magnitude of what had just unfolded. Social media didn't wait. Notifications exploded. Hashtags trended within seconds. Hashtag Crockett exposes. Hashtag Trump falls. Hashtag red folder moment. The world was witnessing history unfold in real time. In the gallery, whispered reactions quickly turned into audible gasps. Political aides, analysts, and journalists leaned in, trying to process the clarity and precision of Crockett's dismantling of decades-long narratives. Every contradiction, every carefully concealed maneuver had been brought into the light. The room, once dominated by the aura of unassailable wealth, now quivered with tension, evidence of power recalibrated. On cable news, anchors scrambled to summarize, dissect, and react. Every panelist's face reflected the same awe. Some admiration, some disbelief. Clips of Crockett's statements went viral in minutes, sparking debates across feeds and timelines. Influencers dissected the mic drop moment, while ordinary viewers shared screenshots of the red folder, commenting on her poise, intelligence, and relentless precision. Even in political circles far from the chamber, the ripple effect was undeniable. Lawmakers who had long avoided taking a position now felt the gravitational pull of accountability. Conversation shifted from speculation to certainty. The empire that once seemed untouchable had been exposed. Every tweet, every shared clip, every trending hashtag reinforced the narrative. Courage and preparation could indeed challenge audacity and spectacle. The corridors outside the chamber buzzed with newfound energy. Young activists circulated. Clips educators highlighted her methodical approach as a lesson in diligence. And everyday citizens felt validated in their belief that justice could prevail against concentrated power. The conversation wasn't merely about wealth or politics. Anymore, it was about moral authority, integrity, and the tangible force of accountability. Meanwhile, Trump's allies were in damage control mode. Private messages, urgent calls, and closed-door strategy sessions attempted to contain the fallout. But the speed of the digital age made containment impossible. Each attempt to spin or deflect was met with further scrutiny. As journalists and analysts cross-referenced Crockett's points with public records and financial filings, the narrative had slipped beyond their control. Memes and commentary flooded. Platforms, some mocking, some awed, all acknowledging the shift in power dynamics. In homes across America, viewers paused, replayed segments, and shared their astonishment. Crockett had become more than a representative. She had become a symbol of precision, courage, and the principle that no empire, no matter how audacious, could stand necked. By the time the session adjourned, the aftershocks were unmistakable. The red folder, once just a stack of paper, had become a catalyst for national conversation. Headlines the next morning didn't merely report events. They captured a moment in history, the dismantling of illusion, the triumph of preparation over hubris. Every social platform echoed with admiration for Crockett's strategy, her composure, and the undeniable clarity she had brought to the proceedings, even in private. Those who had once supported Trump quietly recalculated. Alliances shifted. Influence waned. The psychological impact of seeing an empire tremble so publicly could not be overstated. And as the footage continued to circulate, the consensus became clear. When courage, intellect, and meticulous preparation converge, number illusion, however, grand can withstand the light of truth. In the quiet that followed, Crockett remained composed, her expression serene yet resolute. She had executed the plan she had honed for years, but beyond personal victory, reverberations were societal, a demonstration that accountability could prevail, and that the narrative of power could be challenged when principles were wielded with clarity and courage. As the echoes of the hearing faded, a stillness settled over the nation, not the quiet of inaction, but the calm after a storm of accountability and courage. Jasmine Crockett had done more than expose financial misdeeds. She had crystallized a truth often obscured by wealth, spectacle, and ego, that integrity, preparation, an unwavering principle could challenge even the most imposing of power structures. Across living rooms, offices, and classrooms, viewers reflected on what had just transpired. It was more than a political moment. It was a moral lesson broadcast for the world to see. People saw in Crockett a reminder that authority is not an entitlement, that position does not supersede principle, and that the courage to speak truth to power can inspire a collective awakening. The red folder, once a simple vessel of documentation, had become a symbol. It represented diligence, precision, and the unflinching commitment to hold those in power accountable. Each page had not only exposed wrongdoing, but it also reminded the nation of the potential of one individual to embody justice and to galvanize a society into reflection and action. Crockett's victory was not personal in the traditional sense. It was emblematic. It showcased the triumph of preparation over hubris, of calm reasoning over bluster, of accountability over unchecked dominance. In a country where spectacle often overshadows substance, Her actions served as a beacon that the principles of fairness, diligence, and truth still mattered and could still shape outcomes. Social media continued to pulse with reactions. But the discourse shifted. Admiration for performance gave way to inspiration from action. Citizens engaged in discussions about integrity, ethics, and the importance of civic responsibility. Teachers highlighted the hearing as a real-world case study in leadership, strategy, and moral courage. Parents shared clips with their children explaining that influence should always be tempered by conscience, even beyond politics. The story resonated with anyone who had faced seemingly insurmountable obstacles. Crockett's methodical dismantling of an empire built on illusion became a universal metaphor that preparation, its focus, and unwavering adherence to principle can overcome the most formidable challenges. It was a lesson in resilience, in moral clarity, and in the transformative power of courage aligned with purpose. The nation, for all its divisions, paused to acknowledge a simple truth. Accountability is not optional, and the audacity to wield it responsibly can reshape narratives, alter trajectories, and restore faith in systems long perceived as invulnerable. Crockett's example became a template, a standard for public service, leadership, and personal integrity. As the final statements were recounted and headlines printed, the moral resonance deepened. Beyond the viral clips, beyond the trending hashtags, there remained an enduring impression. Power is fleeting when untethered from principle. And responsibility, when exercised with clarity and courage, can inspire lasting change in the quiet. Reflection that followed, Jasmine Crockett's story transcended politics. It became an emblem of what is possible when one individual meets opportunity with preparation, when morality confronts arrogance, and when justice is pursued with unwavering resolve. The empire had been challenged, illusions exposed, and yet the greatest triumph was not the fall of a powerful figure. It was the affirmation that principle, courage, and integrity can in fact prevail. The nation watched, inspired, reminded that dignity, accountability, and steadfastness are forces that endure beyond any single hearing, any single person, any single headline. And in that enduring truth, the story found its lasting resonance. The chamber lights dimmed, but the impact of Jasmine Crockett's actions continued to radiate far beyond its walls. Every camera that had captured her composure, every clip shared across social feeds, every conversation sparked in living rooms and offices reminded the nation of one undeniable truth: accountability matters. Courage can change outcomes. For viewers, the story was more than political theater. It was a call to reflection. How do we engage with power? How do we uphold principles in the face of spectacle? Crockett's example offered not only answers, but inspiration, showing that preparation, focus, and integrity can tilt even the heaviest scales of influence. If today's story resonated with you, imagine the impact of staying connected. Each like, share, and subscription amplifies narratives that celebrate courage over bluster, substance over showmanship, and accountability over arrogance. By subscribing, you join a community committed to following truth wherever it leads. From the halls of power to the streets, where everyday citizens demand justice. And the story doesn't end here. History is ongoing, and the next chapter is waiting to be written. When you hit that notification bell, you'll be the first to witness it. The moments that inspire, challenge, and remind us all why vigilance, preparation, and integrity matter more than ever. So if Jasmine Crockett's courage and clarity inspired you today, don't just watch, participate. Share this video, discuss the lessons, and subscribe for more stories that spotlight truth, justice, and the power of principle in action. Because every empire tested, every truth revealed, and every act of courage reminds us all: vigilance matters. Preparation pays, and integrity always leaves a mark.